never heard of Wuthering Heights. What do you mean, you've never heard of Wuthering Heights? This is a conversation I had not once, but twice with two different men in my life the week I carried around this novel during my reread. And sure, I don't expect everyone to know about classic literature, but wasn't this required reading in high school? Did I just make that part up about my childhood? Raise your hand if you learned about the Bronte sisters in sophomore English class. I need to calm down. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Neverland Book Club. If you can't tell, I've been both a bookworm and a theater mouse this month. That's a joke. I'm probably not going to go support this movie in theaters. Last week, we discussed the literary impact of Bram Stoker's Dracula. This week, we're traveling about 50 plus odd years, probably more, before the time of Dracula to the Yorkshire moors of northern England, to the green hills of Thrushcross Grange, and turbulent winds of Wuthering Heights. Despite what the recent saucy trailer of the new film adaptation might lead you to believe, Wuthering Heights is not a sweeping romance. Not by my personal standards, at least. Instead, this is a story about grief, prejudice, trauma, isolation, and a prime example of why some books truly need character guides. Because why are there at least two of everyone in this story? I need a spreadsheet. And before we go any further, I'd like to make two things clear. One, this is but one video on one person's opinion, so, I don't know, be nice. Voice your own thoughts, come to your own conclusions, but always remember to walk with kindness in your step, dear viewers. And two, despite the new film being poorly cast and consulted by no literary or period experts, that's not why I'm here today. There are plenty of videos discussing how this adaptation's carelessness harms the story's integrity rather than helps it, and I rather those creators get your attention if that's what you're looking for. The purpose of this video is to analyze the novel itself and how Emily Bronte resists romantic classification, creating instead a gothic exploration of emotional absolutism and the generational consequences of unresolved trauma. Let's get into it. A brief history for context, Wuthering Heights was written in 1847 by a female author. Emily Bronte was in a literary powerhouse trio of sisters. Her older sister, Charlotte Bronte, known for authoring Jane Eyre, and her younger sister, Anne Bronte, known for The Tenant of Wildfell Hall. Emily was no stranger to grief, death, and the loss of loved ones growing up. Having two older sisters who died during childhood, the family had plenty of dramatic and tragic material to work with. Despite her family's acclaim and access to the literary world, Wuthering Heights is the one and only fiction novel Emily Bronte publicly published before her death at the age of 30. We see a number of female authors finding their voices during this time in history. However, at the time, women were not expected to write with such reckless abandon. The initial reception of Wuthering Heights had readers confused and shocked at Bronte's unladylike and confrontational style, where she gravitated more towards the brutal realities of life and love rather than the polished comfort of the contemporary romances of the time. And I just love her for that. Think about the confrontation we see depicted in Pride and Prejudice, for example. And yes, that was published a bit earlier than this, in 1813, but that level of polished femininity was what was expected. I love you most ardently, versus I have not broken your heart. You have broken it, and in breaking it, you have broken mine. You see how both possesses passion, but on an entirely different scale. A quick summary for those who somehow never even heard of it. Wuthering Heights follows the calamitous relationship between Catherine Earnshaw and Heathcliff. As children, Catherine's father brings home an abandoned young boy who is described as appearing of Romani descent. I'm being politically correct here. The book is far more blunt about describing how Heathcliff is not white, and therefore not worthy of the respect and station of which he seeks. After the death of Catherine's father, her brother Hindley takes it upon himself to remind Heathcliff of his inferiority. This is a fundamental pillar of the entire story's purpose, and is the reason why Catherine and Heathcliff's intense bond is shaped and ultimately warped by class, pride, and emotional absolutism. The story is also narrated through layers of detachment and unreliability, not only through Nellie Dean, a maid, but through Mr. Lockwood as well, an outside observer / reader surrogate. As the novel progresses and we meet the Lintons, siblings who serve as structural parallels to the Earnshaws, we see how Catherine's decision to conform to her higher standing and expectation and marry for social stability. This devastates Heathcliff, leading him to seek revenge that ripples across generations, not only due to his rejection from Catherine, but from her brother Hindley as well. Set against the harsh Yorkshire moors, the story unfolds less as a romance than as a study of obsession, inheritance, and unresolved grief. Love does not redeem these characters, it corrodes them, haunting both the living and the dead. The novel concludes not with a triumph, but with an eerie quiet as the next generation attempts to live among the emotional ruins left behind. Now, if you were fortunate enough to have read Wuthering Heights in AP Lit class at the age of 15, I'm sure you're familiar with the many themes presented in the novel, some of which include emotional extremism, love versus passion, constraint through class, trauma bonding and inheritance, and isolation. All concepts stemmed from social discomfort, which leads to certain decisions based not on romance, but strategy. Starting with emotional extremism, the words Bronte chooses for certain characters to use, both towards one another and in description of themselves, is no mistake. Dialogue and action both paint a picture of every character without moderation or compromise. This makes each character feel like they're being played at full volume. These are the characters that transcend time, that feel relevant no matter what century you're reading their story. Heathcliff is not only violent with his actions, but the words he uses to express his grief and feelings of inadequacy. Catherine is the embodiment of a storm, chaos within her heart, emotions unidentified and misunderstood. Threats of violence appear more often than the violence itself, but it's their presence that keeps the reader looking out for what's to come next. My cat agrees. Hi, buddy. Can you give me a minute? Oh, you want to be with me? I'm sorry. Later, okay? This brings me to our narrator, Nellie. These are her words through the lens of Mr. Lockwood. As an unreliable narrator, we cannot be certain her depictions of dialogue and intent accurate, especially after so many years removed from the events themselves. However, with her narrative choice, we see another theme of constraint through class. Nellie is part of the Earnshaw family by employment. She is inherited through the generations of Catherines, the same way an heirloom might be passed down from mother to daughter. Her interpretation can only be taken with so much understanding in mind. Her willingness to help Heathcliff says far more about her proximity to his situation, often coming to his aid when he needed it most. This constraint due to class is seen not only in the narration, but in the actions of each character. Hindley's constraint in compassion towards Heathcliff, Cathy's constraint in her affections, basing her decisions on strategy rather than romance or empathy, Heathcliff's constraint in his admissions, which soon led him down the road of anti-hero and antagonist. Class holds each character like a vice, containing them within their expected boxes, which then begets each character's trauma. In chapter 15, which I believe is the emotional climax of the novel, Heathcliff and Cathy have it out on her deathbed. Spoiler. They finally express nearly all that's been repressed in an illustration of passionate confession. When Cathy begs for his forgiveness, Heathcliff responds with, "It is hard to forgive, and to look at those eyes and feel those wasted hands. I forgive what you have done to me. I love my murderer, but yours, how can I?" We've all heard the phrase trauma bonding, and this book takes it to a completely different level. Cathy's initial relationship with Heathcliff is so much like a child's. Play comes first, companionship, adventure, mischief. The loss of these positive memories, imagining what a life together could have been, that image being ripped away by a literal dog attack, all before witnessing the abuse of her best friend at the hands of her older brother. Cathy's trauma is not as obvious as Heathcliff's, though it is there all the same, creating a bond between the two which, despite everything, cannot be broken. This trauma is then inherited generationally. Hindley's treatment of his own son, Hareton, reducing him to an illiterate servant, is then remedied by Cathy's daughter, Catherine, teaching him to read. We see with this new generation a redefining of love, which brings me to the two's misbelief of love versus possession. It is no secret to anyone in the novel that these two characters love one another. Even Cathy's husband, Edgar, knows her affections for Heathcliff could never match her feelings for him. Cathy is his possession, but he is not her love. The same could be said for the character parallels in Heathcliff and Isabella. Heathcliff possesses Isabella in an attempt to possess some part of the Linton name, making him that much closer to his goal of being worthy enough for Cathy. He does not love Isabella, despite her feelings for him. There is no love in either of these relationships. There is only isolation. I'm going to talk about symbols in a moment, but there are constant references to closed or locked doors throughout the novel. Characters isolate themselves from the world not just in the literal sense through their physical proximity, but socially, emotionally. This metaphor of a closed door representing isolation brings me to the many symbols throughout the novel, be it the dogs appearing every time there's conflict, the constant references to weather representing emotional volatility, or the moors embodying our doomed lover's emotional wildness, danger, and longing for freedom. The novel is chock full of allegory functioning as psychological landscape, and you know your girl loves a good metaphor. But two of my favorite symbols I believe are used so well in telling this story are the representations of Wuthering Heights as chaos against Thrushcross Grange, representing control. The characters move between these two locations depending on their mental state and current social standing. The other symbol I just love is ghosts. Unresolved desires, unfinished relationships, unrequited affections. The ghosts of our past haunt us all. But when Heathcliff called out, "Be with me always, take any form, drive me mad," so that Cathy's ghost may haunt him, so he may be ever nearer to her in death, oh, so toxic. Ghosts are present both as metaphorical representations of unprocessed grief and as physical manifestations of promises made to the living. And that, I believe, is part of what makes this a gothic romance. Gothic doesn't always only mean spooky, scary skeletons that send shivers down your spine. It lives within the repression, haunting, and psychological unrest planted within the reader. Gothic romance is not a representation of healthy love, that which saves the character, but rather dooms them. Calling this a romance is both true and misleading. But hey, I'm not complaining. Which brings me to the adaptations. There are way too many adaptations I simply cannot be bothered to watch. But like with the newest one, Heathcliff and Cathy's relationship is often softened, romanticized, and whitewashed. At least that's what I've gathered from what I have seen. We want to see yearning on the screen when the novel provides damage. Obsession is miscast as passion. This pattern often robs the general public of viewers from witnessing the true purpose of these two characters and the limits of what they could mean to one another at the time. However, I do believe these choices are systematic, meant to adhere to the standards and expectations of film audiences rather than readership. If you know of an actual, authentic adaptation of the novel itself that doesn't squander the topical nature of the novel, please do put them in the comments below. So, should you read Wuthering Heights? Short answer, yes. Wuthering Heights is for sure one of the classics I truly believe is worth your time and reading attention. Not only for the story, but for all the stories underlying its premise and purpose. This story from the 1800s is relevant now to this day. Its characters are just as human with the same desires, conflicts, misbeliefs, and societal limitations we may find today. As I said last week with our Dracula deep dive, which we concluded was not a romance. If you're a fan of Gothic literature, that which embodies the wild and tumultuous storm of a doomed romance, please read Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights. Same goes for Jane Eyre by Emily's sister, Charlotte Bronte. If you're interested in reading more examples of the surrogate narrator, consider The Secret History by Donna Tartt, Atonement by Ian McEwan, Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, of course, and The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. If none of those are for you, and you prefer a more contemporary take on romance with two rather reliable narrators, may I suggest this one. You want themes of passion, isolation, and doomed lovers figuring it all out in the end? It's all right here. All can be found in the description below. Those links help the channel, so thank you in advance if you do use them. All right. That's all I have to say on Wuthering Heights today, dear viewers. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to like this video if you liked it, and please do subscribe if you're not. We've broken 3,000 subscribers last week, so I'm quite happy with that, even though it's kind of small. Our goal for this year is 5,000, so fingers crossed. Today's shoutout goes to Hammer and Whiskers 5463. Thank you for your comment. As stated in my reading comprehension video a couple weeks back, I'm prioritizing reading quality this year over quantity, which I hope will resonate through these videos as well. Alright, I'm off to go see if anyone in my family has an HBO subscription I can borrow so I can watch the original 1939 adaptation of Wuthering Heights. Stay lost, keep reading. Goodbye.